If we remember our hierarchy of organization, we remember that we, as an organism, right, are basically just made up of organs, and organs are made up of tissues of different types, and tissues are basically just made up of different types of cells. Now, if we want to function as a cohesive unit, if you will, in order to maintain homeostasis, right, our cells that work to make up everything above it in this hierarchy of organization are going to need to communicate with one another, and there are a variety of ways at which cells can communicate with each other. So the first way at which cells can communicate with each other, which is probably the easiest and most simplistic, right, is the use of a channel that abuts two adjacent cells. Right? You probably remember this from your previous courses or learnings, right? That this is a nexus junction using something called a connexon, right? Or some people refer to these as gap junctions. So things that sort of like happen over here in this cell can just move across that junction and into this cell. And so these cells can work together and communicate with one another. That is the easiest form or the most simplistic form of communication. The other ways that cells communicate with one another is that they actually use signaling molecules in some way, shape, or form. Okay? And signaling molecules can be diverse and they can act in a diverse range of ways. Okay, so the first sort of like interaction that we're going to talk about cell communication that I'll mention is something known as a synapse. And we'll talk about synapses in more detail in later videos, but a synapse is one that occurs between a neuron, right, which is a specialized cell of another of the nervous system, and either another neuron or some sort of target cell, right? And so this neuron will have little chemical molecules in here known as neurotransmitters that will release into here and bind to a receptor on either another neuron or a target cell or effector cell. Okay, so a synapse is a special means of communication between neurons, which carry information via action potentials, and its target cell. And these signaling molecules here, those are known as neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. Okay, so that's one type. The next type we'll talk about three different variants of communication and communication molecules. So all right, so the first one that we're going to talk about is something known as autocrines. Okay, and autocrines are signaling molecules that will be sort of released from a cell. So let's do some like exocytosis here. Right, they'll be released from the cell, and the cell itself will have receptors for that signaling molecule. So autocrines are signaling molecules that act on the same cell that is released. So we can say that the target is the same cell as the release. Okay. The second type is something known as a paracrine. And paracrine molecules are ones that are released by a cell. We'll just go ahead and do exocytosis again here. And the target or receptors are found on cells that are nearby or of the same tissue. Right? So target is same tissue, but different cell. Okay. And the last type is probably one of the most complex. Is something that we refer to as a hormone. And hormones are signaling molecules that are released from a cell, and they are picked up by the bloodstream. Okay, so their target are distant cells. So the target is of different tissues. So those are your main types of cell communication. You have your synapse, which is specialized to neurons, autocrines that target the same cell that releases the signaling molecule, paracrines that target the same tissue but a different cell within that tissue, and then hormones, which are your long distance signaling molecules that are released and picked up by the bloodstream and transported to different tissues. Okay, and so these signaling molecules can have different effects on their target. They can act in different ways when they get to the target based off of the type of receptor that's present, based off of what type of signaling molecule it is. So in some different videos, we're going to talk about what sort of molecules can act as signaling molecules, and then we're going to talk about the different effects and mechanisms at which the signaling molecules can act on a target cell.